today's sermon is just a little bit higgledy-piggledy because it's kind of last minute. But I thought I would talk to you today, something I started a few months ago, a sermon about conflict, both in the church and in your life. The reality is all of us encounter it no matter where we are, whether we're in our church or our jobs. At some point, sometime, somewhere, somebody is going to disagree. Now, I admit I have more experience in my job with conflict within the church, but it doesn't matter. The ideas, these concepts from Scripture, they'll help all of us no matter where we are in life. When I was visiting my grandmother one summer as she was recovering from an injury, we were going to a local church, her local church, and after Sunday school one day, she said, "Did you meet Margaret?" And I said, "Yes, I think I did, a lovely lady wearing a church hat." She said, "Yes." I said, "I actually just saw her leave. Isn't she going to stay for the service?" And Nanny said, "Oh no, she never stays for the service." I said, "How come? She's mad at the pastor?" I said, "Why?" She goes, "Well, one day she was standing in the hallway and he walked past her and ran into her and he did not apologize." Now I want to pause for just a moment. I want to tell you about this pastor. He is not anyone who I would emulate in ministry. In fact, I would honestly say he was a bad pastor. And I say that because, and I realize what the heft of what I'm saying, but I say that because he would regularly lie from the pulpit. He would say things like, "I took a call from the governor yesterday," or "I just took a call from the town council." Meanwhile, the people on the council would say, "No, we haven't called him." And he's like, "We live in a small part of South Charleston." They think he doesn't know. And one of his biggest claims from the pulpit was that he was the original Michelin Man. In those Michelin tire commercials, he was one of the originals, apparently. And of course, the church called him, and they called on him, and they called the Michelin people, and they found out that that actually wasn't true. There's only one Michelin Man, that was Mr. Michelin all those years ago. So I want you to know that this is not a pastor for whom I had a great affinity. But I did say to Nanny that day, I said, "Nanny, that doesn't make sense. Did she ever talk to him? Did she ever go to him and say, 'Sir, you ran into me and it hurt'?" She said, "No, I don't think she did." I said, "Because even the worst of pastors isn't going to make their job rowing down old ladies. Like, that's just not how that's going to work. I'm sure if he knew, he would apologize. I'm sure he didn't notice. Maybe he didn't see. Maybe he was distracted. But I'm sure he did not intentionally try and knock that lady down." Well, of course, that is the way it works, isn't it? When conflict comes up among us, it seems so big, so insurmountable. When something goes wrong, it just seems like it's so overwhelming. Now, I'm going to pause here for just a moment. I'm going to tell you all, I'm not a big fan of toilet humor or bathroom humor. And to be honest with you, I don't like talking about bodily functions, and these are not things that I enjoy. I stayed far away from the medical industry for this reason. But I will tell you that conflict is a lot like going to the bathroom. It's constant, and it's regular, and it's natural, and it's normal, and it happens all the time. And once it's over, you don't remember a whole lot about it. I might be able to ask you if you've been to the bathroom this morning. You might be able to tell me, but if I ask you what time did you go to the bathroom 2 days ago, you probably don't remember, do you? And you also learn something about yourself sometimes when you go to the bathroom. For instance, I need to drink more water, or I don't need to eat that anymore, it upsets my stomach. These are things that happen during conflict. We learn little things about ourselves, but it doesn't have to be so memorable that you carry it around with you. And, forgive me, but just like going to the bathroom, if you don't deal with conflict, you either, one, make a mess, or two, it becomes so toxic, it makes you sick, and possibly sickens those around you. The story of today's scripture is a story of conflict, and a story of the church in conflict. And of course, first thing that happens when they have conflict is they have a meeting. Nothing has changed, y'all. It's been 2019 years, and what does the church do? But it gathers people together. And so we have what is often referred to as the First Ecumenical Council, which, if you know your church history, ecumenical councils stand tall in our history. They're some of the most important moments. And we often refer to this as Jerusalem I, because this is where we have, in Acts chapter 15, we tell the story of the Jerusalem Council. Now, what is at issue here? Well, here it is. They have all these Gentiles, these non-Jewish people that are coming to Jesus. In fact, the book of Acts records thousands coming to them each day. Thousands this day, thousands that day, and it seems like the church is growing at an exponential rate. And as this is happening, the question comes, what about these Gentile converts? They haven't been bar mitzvahed, they haven't been circumcised, they eat foods that Jews don't eat. How Jewish do they need to be in order to be Christian people? And you have to remember that at this point, Christianity is not independent of Judaism. Christianity is just a movement within. In other words, Methodists and Presbyterians are both Christians. These new Christian people are just Jews of a different kind, a different nature. They follow this Rabbi Jesus. And so as the story begins to unfold, Paul and Barnabas travel with all the others to go back to Antioch, with all the other apostles and elders, and they need to discuss this matter. What do we believe about people being Jewish and being Christian? How does that work? And so we just read their debate. They talked about it back and forth. The Pharisees say, and the Gentiles must be circumcised. They must be required to keep the laws of Moses. Meanwhile, Paul and Barnabas say, you know what? The law has been a burden upon us that we could not fulfill. And now we want to place that burden on the Gentiles? Why don't we just tell them and simplify and bring it down to these things? Don't eat food that's given to idols. Don't eat food from a strangled animal. Don't consume blood. Flee from sexual morality. Don't worship idols. And we'll just leave it at that. And so the council decides this is the best thing. And so they decide you don't have to be circumcised to be a Christian person. You don't have to follow the laws of Moses in its entirety. You just need to keep a few of them front and center in front of you. You don't have to carry all those heavy books. Thank you for that, Tara. That was well done. You don't have to carry all those heavy books. And pretty soon they send out a letter to all the churches all over the world, and conflict ends, and conflict has never been seen in the church since. This story begins in verse number 14. In verse number 15, we have our next conflict. The story continues, and what happens? But Paul and Barnabas leave the assembly, and Barnabas says, look, John Mark is going to be traveling with us on this journey. And Paul says, no, he's not. John Mark deserted us. He ran away. He got scared. There will be no John Mark on this missionary journey. And Barnabas says, no, he's growing. He'll get it. He's coming with us. And pretty soon, Paul and Barnabas, who were lockstep just a few paragraphs before, who were walking in lockstep, who were absolutely connected to each other, now they're divided. And pretty soon, Paul goes off his direction, and Barnabas and John Mark go off in theirs. The conflict split them apart. You know, when I said to you the conflict was regular, I meant it. It's constant. It constantly comes to us, one day or another. And it constantly comes. And it's not a matter of the character of the people. That it's not the fact that John Mark and Barnabas were bad and Paul was good. It's just the fact that people disagree. And that has been happening for centuries. The word of the day for conflict is regular. And the reality is, because it's so regular, because it's so constant, because it happens so often, we should be a lot better at it. We really should. But still what happens to us is we do everything we can possibly to avoid it. And in doing so, by never confronting it, by never facing it face to face, all it does is poison us. Pretty soon, our conflict turns to murmuring and grumbling. Pretty soon, our conflict turns into gossip and talking about people behind their back. Pretty soon, our conflict becomes something that stands between us and keeps us from being friends. It's almost like, well, when you have to go to the bathroom. Pretty soon, you don't see to those needs, and again, I hate toilet humor, I'm not trying to be funny, this is just the most apt metaphor. Pretty soon, if you don't, pretty soon it's all you can think about, right? It's on your mind and you can't do your work, you can't do anything else, right? This is just like conflict, isn't it? It's just eating away at your brain, isn't it? And then pretty soon you find yourself being irritable with people, right? Because you got something important that's on your brain and it's going and it's going and it's going. And the reality is if we don't deal with conflict, ooh, children, if we don't deal with conflict, conflict deals with us. I've met lots of people in the church, and there's always that one or two persons who are bitter and angry. I can just see them in my mind. They're all standing up in front of me. And the reality is the reason that they're bitter and that they're angry is because since they didn't deal with their conflict deals with them. Better than Matthew chapter 18. If your brother or your sister sins against you, go and correct them when you are alone together. If they listen to you, then you won over your brother and sister. But if they don't listen, take one or two others with you, so that every word may be established by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses. But if they won't pay attention, report it to the church. Note what we're being told here by Jesus. If you have a problem with someone, go to them directly, face to face, for real. Speak it, say it out loud. And if you go to them and they listen to you, great. But if they don't, bring someone else along. Step 2, bring another person along and talk to them face to face. Notice how none of this is beneath the surface. Notice how Paul doesn't say go to another person and then complain. No, instead, Paul says the reality is we must confront the conflict. What Jesus says, that we must deal with this face to face, get it done, finish it, so that you don't have to live with that constant nagging sound in your mind. Conflict is normal and natural and regular, and the reality is the sooner you get to talking about it, the less damage it does. The sooner you move past it. Now I have here a few warnings that I want to attach to this. The first one is that this particular way of dealing with conflict presumes that there is no mental illness. Okay? So that's the first thing that we need to remember. Sometimes people who are mentally ill, it doesn't matter how much you reason with them, it's just going to continue to be contentious. That has to do with the disease. The second thing you need to know is that this also presumes that this is not an abusive situation. If this is an abusive situation, and if you find yourself, if you're listening to me and you're like, I'm in an abusive situation, please come and talk to us immediately. We'll get you the help you need. But if you are in a situation where 2 persons are rational and are wise, well, the reality is that going to the person and just talking about it and getting it out in the open and dealing with it, maybe you won't finally see one another eye to eye, but each will be more aware of the needs and the wants of the other. The reality is conflict shouldn't be a big deal. It happens all the time. And we can handle it. We can handle it. It's not insurmountable. The reality is there are so many times when people respond to conflict the way we used to do when we were in the 3rd grade and then we were on the playground. Maybe you've been in this scenario, perhaps in your marriage or perhaps in your life. How are you today? Fine. You don't seem fine. You seem a little angry. I'm fine. This is the adult equivalent of, I'm not talking to you. Isn't it? Isn't it? This is the adult equivalent of, I'm taking my dollies and going home. You ever have been in the 3rd grade and someone comes up to you and you're playing and you're having a wonderful day and all of a sudden someone comes up to you and says, Susie says that Susie wanted me to tell you that she's mad at you. And then they walk away. And you're like, Susie's mad at me? I don't understand. Why didn't she just tell me herself? And then you go over to Susie, right? I'm not talking to you, I'm mad at you. Why are you mad at me? I'm not going to tell you. Guess we're at an impasse then, aren't we? And do you see how it's all a game? It's all manipulation. It's all false. It's all fake. And all it does is ratchet up that feeling of conflict a little further. All it does is put people on guard and makes them defensive. Better still, to follow Matthew 18 and Jesus' example, if your brother or sister sins against you, go and correct them when you are alone together. Just have the conversation and then move on with your friendship and move on with your life. This is the healthy thing. This is what must be done. This is the powerful thing. The truth is, we as a Christian people, we have a marvelous power in us to be reconciled to God and to be reconciled to one another. We who have been given grace by Jesus, we are people who can extend that same grace to one another. We who have been forgiven so much can indeed and should indeed and are admonished indeed to forgive one another. There is one other thing people do in conflict, one dangerous and insidious cancer in the life of the church. To do this is to release the flames of hell into the middle of the fellowship of the saints. And it's so insidious that Saint Benedict said, when he talked about his monks,